Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hey, Comics fam, short and sweet here. We have a Patreon, so if you want to help us keep the lights on and spread the good word, you can drop a small tithe in the offering plate at Cryptid Creator Corner Pod over there. Membership starts at $1 per month, and we've got some great extra footage from the podcast dropping soon over there. Link in the show notes, and thank you for your continued support.
Thanks for your donation.
Do you love sci-fi? Are you a horror fan? Maybe you prefer action or fantasy. 2000 AD has it all and should be on your radar. With a whole universe of characters from Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog to Rogue Trooper, Shakara Halo Jones, and many more, every weekly issue you get 5 action-packed thrills from incredible creators such as Garth Ennis, Rob Williams, Alex DeCampi, Dan Abnett, and so many others. Get a print subscription and it'll arrive to your door every week. And your first issue is free, or subscribe digitally. Get free back issues and download DRM-free copies of every issue for just $9 a month. That's 128 pages of incredible comics every month for less than $10. That's like a whole graphic novel's worth. All subscribers get amazing offers like discount vouchers and exclusive product offers. Head to 2000ad.com and click on subscribe now, or download the 2000AD app. And why wait? Start reading today. I'll put links in the show notes for you.
Hello, and welcome to Comic Book Yeti's Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Jimmy Gasparo, and I'm very excited to talk to today's guest. He has been a writer on such TV shows as 911, 12 Monkeys, Picard. He also worked with Clive Barker in adapting Hellraiser to the comic book form. He has a brand new comic book that is coming out this summer, July 23rd, which from Dark Horse, which I believe is a one day before his birthday. So you'll have
Yes.
to pick up a comic and wish him a happy birthday. But please, welcome to it's TexArcanum. I'm really excited to talk about it. Please welcome to the podcast, Chris Monfette. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the chance to come on and chat.
No, I'm very excited, especially whenever I do it. Like I said before we started recording, I try to do a little bit of research. But yeah, was excited to kind of thoughts like hear your background, in terms of after college and interning for different places. I mean, you've written, you're kind of like a entertainment journalist. You wrote for like IGN and
Yeah.
G4 and doing things along those lines. And then, to kind of um make your way from doing, PR and then writing about the stuff that you like and then,
Yeah.
then being in the room where it happens, to easily quote Hamilton, but to be in a writer's room, to do that, to write comics, to adapt like Hellraiser and, kind of work with Clive Barker on that. And now this new series, which uh eh, 100% in my wheelhouse of stuff that I like. I mean, I want to talk about it. Texarcanum. I thought of it like a Justified meets Supernatural.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. But yeah, can you just? I mean, I want to talk about Texarkana, but can you briefly just kind of tell me, did my research steer me wrong, or was that kind of like your
No,
path at where you are today?
that's 100% the path. Whenever I talk to folks, so, a lot of times if I get asked advice about how to sort of make your way into a career like this, I'll say talent obviously is a big part of the recipe and skill and but it's 90% just like it's luck, right? It's good fortune. And the only way that you can sort of invite that to happen is you just have to put yourself where lightning strikes and then hope that it does. And so,
Yeah.
what I grew up knowing, I grew up knowing that I love genre. I love storytelling. I love science fiction. I love horror. I love fantasy. I was a nerd from like my earliest days, and I grew up in Western Massachusetts. I grew up in a place where there wasn't an easy pipeline to get into this stuff. And so if you had this sort of big dream, you had to the thing I figured out early on was I just had to put myself where that would even be possible. And so I went to school in New York, and from there I got a bunch of interns in film publicity and PR and started a career doing that, which eventually led me to a career in entertainment journalism because I very quickly realized, instead of writing PR plans and like shilling for the stuff I loved, I could get paid to write about the stuff. And so
Yeah,
I was very lucky to be
better.
taken in. Yeah, I was very lucky to be taken in by my sort of tribe of like-minded nerds at IGN, and was there for many years, and then G4 for a couple of years, and all of that was really just I knew I could write, I knew what I loved, and I knew if I could write about the stuff I loved that I might meet the right people and position myself in the right place, that, if I were gonna get lucky, if I were gonna have some fortune, that it would be possible. And, through meeting Clive Barker as a journalist, to him taking me under his wing and really being a mentor of mine early on, and folks that I met, yeah, my time at IGN, eventually going on to write and create 12 Monkeys and really give me my first staff job in television. I was just very fortunate and very lucky to find a group of great creative like-minded people, and we've all just sort of spent the last, 15 years of my professional writing career trying to support each other and work with each other, and kind of lift each other up where we can. So I've been very fortunate, very grateful, to just work with some incredible people who've just opened themselves up to me. So I definitely I definitely have had I've definitely had good mentors and good luck. So
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome, and but kind of like an incredible journey. When you start working, when you meet Clive Barker and eventually leads to this adaptation of
yeah.
Hellraiser in comic form, I just I wasn't sure. Had you written like I know you had written before, but had you written comics before? Was that something you
No.
thought you wanted to do, or you were just into storytelling and you were gonna figure it out somehow?
Yeah, I think early on, if when I was a kid, I was writing short stories, and I think I had ambitions to be a novelist at the time, and because I would just devour books. It was Stephen King, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, like all those John Saul, all those great like horror storytellers growing up, and I would just like book after book after book. And so if you'd asked me when I was a kid, like, what do you think you're going to do? I would have thought, be a novelist. I want to write novels. And then, I eventually discovered my love of film, and, I read comic books my whole life. And when Clive and I met, and Clive sort of, identified, he goes, "Well, you're a writer. I can tell that you don't want to just be a journalist. You have ambitions to tell stories." Our first couple of projects together, where I wrote two films for his company at the time, that were adaptations of his short stories. One was a movie called Down Satan. The other was a movie called Son of Celluloid, and both of those never ended up getting made. But the process of working on those together, we developed a kind of creative shorthand. And he was an amazing teacher, an amazing friend. And we actually wrote a comic book together prior to Hellraiser called Seduce, which was this really crazy, bizarre. IDW published it. It was it was a 3D comic. It was meant to be super surrealistic. It actually like came with the red and blue 3D glasses. And when Clive asked me to do that, I was like, "Look, I've never written a comic before. I don't even know how. And I've read comics my whole life, but I've certainly never written one." Um, and so, and sort of the first thing I was tasked with doing was, can you do this hyper surreal, super experimental format, non-narrative? There's sort of a loose narrative, but it's really just more of this crazy experience, this sort of trippy idea that Clive had in mind. And so I really kind of, I think, I remember James Cameron gave an interview once where he was talking about Terminator, and he said, if I'd have known that I wasn't able to do it, I probably wouldn't have done it. He's like, but we didn't know at the time when we were making Terminator that we weren't supposed to be able to make this. And I think that's very much my experience with my first comic book, which is like, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was supposed to be able or not able to do. And so we just wrote this crazy batshit surrealistic 3D hallucinogenic horror trip, that, was a great collaboration. And so when the opportunity to do Hellraiser, which was a much more traditional narrative, came along, Clive thought of me, and Boom liked what they saw with that one issue of Seduce, and brought me on board, and that was my sort of first go at like, here's an 8 issue, tell your story, and you can use Hellraiser as a jump off point, and really just play in somebody else's mythological sandbox. So that
Yeah,
was such a treat, such a gift.
that's awesome. Um, and so then you've been, in writers' rooms, working on, like we said, 911 and the most seasons 2 and 3 of Picard, and
Mhm.
I guess right around that same time was the WGA,
Yeah.
the writer strike. Was just because I know kind of like the timeline of how long it takes to make a comic book. Was Texarcanum something that you had visions of doing previously, or was it something born out of the WGA strike?
No, it really wasn't. It was so I'm originally from the East Coast, and so is my wife, and I live out full time in Los Angeles. But we, because we have dogs, end up taking this crazy road trip once a year across Route 40 and then up 81, uh, sort of just back and forth across the country. And Texarcanum was really born of this desire and this interest in all the little places that you encounter along the way on that trip. It's such interesting open country, and you can stop in all these sort of little touristy spots, these little gas stations, and you find all these amazing communities that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find. And you get a real sense of the size and scale and scope of our country. Um and it's such sort of like a highlight of the year. It's a beautiful ride. We always get to see new and interesting things. And you know, just on those long drives, you're listening to sort of like I'm a big fan of like country folk Appalachian, like Gregory Alan Isaac
Oh,
of Lord
oh,
Huron.
nice. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and so you'd be taking these long drives listening to that sort of music, which has this sort of interesting, cool, ethereal quality. And I just kept thinking, man, there's got to be a show that's set out here, that's not about that talks about this sort of middle America as a collision point for all of these different immigration stories that make up America, this amazing tapestry of cultures that make up this country. Everybody brought their stories with them. Everybody brought their ghosts and their demons and their angels and their gods, and it just occurred to me that all that is colliding out in the Midwest and in the places, but oddly, seldom if ever do we get stories told against that backdrop, and so all of my favorite characters in comics are those noir supernatural PIs, whether it's John Constantine or whether it's Clive's Harry Demore or whether it's Harry Dresden, but they're all like guarding the gates of major metropolises, right? Like whether it's London or Chicago or New York. And it struck me that there might be an opportunity to kind of access that kind of character in a very like Raylan Givens justified kind of way, in the sort of rural parts of the country where you don't necessarily see those mythologies represented in a way that you might, unlike, like it was with like a Constantine show or something like that. So
yeah.
that was sort of like the seeds of where Texarcanum was born from, was my love of that kind of character, but my wanting to do it in a different way, in a different place, so that
Right.
it's so you're not doing the same thing over and over again that everyone else is doing.
Yeah, there's actually a line in the opening of it where it talks about the things that we've seen in other, media, and, that something that doesn't try and convince you is, shot in Vancouver.
Right, right,
But, um,
right.
but that's what struck me when I read that line, and made me think of, like, Supernatural, which I think shot in Vancouver. But, that was something that was set a good part of it, like, in the Midwest, like, they were in Kansas, but because of where, the reality of television
Yeah,
production, so much of it looks the same. And, like, I was struck by, oh, yeah, like, when you're doing comics and you have an artist like Miguel, Martos,
yeah,
working on it, you you're not constrained by it can look like anywhere. It can
Yeah.
really look like the places you're talking about, and
Yeah.
the people can really look like the people that inhabit these worlds and
Yeah.
these towns. So I love that aspect about having a comic like this set in the places it is set in.
Yeah. And
Um,
I think that, it wears its influences pretty obviously on its sleeve. I mean, for me, I think Justified, one of my all-time favorite TV shows, kind of a
yeah,
perfect show.
me too.
Raylan Givens is
Yeah,
kind of a perfect TV character, and, there's a very overt nod to that character in the first issue of the book. But, Avery Bell, our protagonist, is really cut from the cloth of the Raylan Givens of the world, and so, my thought here was, let's do Elmore Leonard meets Stephen King, and let's do it in the places that these stories are actually set, and, the wonderful thing in terms of television that Yellowstone really opened the door for, and that sort of Taylor Sheridan sort of populist, Midwest rural, storytelling has really made possible is that you can tell stories in these little, rural sections of the country. And, like you said, now as a comic book, you have the opportunity to not be beholden to the limitations of television. You can actually like depict these places in real, honest, sort of vivid Technicolor, and so that's what we were able to do with these first 4 issues is, really sort of pick our locations, and try to tell a story that feels genuine and authentically set in the places that it's set.
yeah. And I also, I mean, Miguel Martos's artwork is wonderful. Just the rest of the creative team. It's Patricio Del Pesce and Michael Heisler. Great creative team. Everything looks fantastic. The horror elements are really great. But one thing I also noticed, and I had read you talking about this in a different interview. I forget where, but you were talking about the way you write and being a writer. I don't know how long ago this interview was, so if your style has changed, but you said that you know you don't set out to write the way that people talk. Like
No.
you want to use the language. And that's something that I like a TV show like Justified, certainly anything that like Aaron Sorkin worked on. Both the play and the movie version of Mammoth's Glengarry Glen
Yeah.
Ross,
Yeah.
like like, and I had read that about it about you in the that you saying that in the interview before I read TexArcanum, and I mean, some of the dialogue in it, I love the way Avery speaks, and he is there with, I guess she's the chief of police?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way they talk to each other, um I mean, I felt it as almost like kind of like rapid fire back and forth. I just love the way they spoke to each other. I love their like Avery's like little like turns of phrase. I just thought it was it just had a like a poetry kind of to it that I really loved because I feel like a lot of times in modern comics, and I love all comics. I'm not criticizing anybody. Everybody has a different style.
Right.
But, when you look at a comic from like the Silver Age, and there's a lot of words. There's so many words. And I feel like the modern trend is to because it is a visual medium to let a lot of the visuals do the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And for a lot of projects, I get it. And I love that aspect of it too. But to have a comic like this with, you know, mashing up these things that I love, but with like a very interestingly articulate, like in the way he speaks, like Avery Bell. Like it's
Yeah.
not, don't get me wrong, listeners. It's not like some type of like, highfalutin prose that you're going to need a dictionary to understand, but there's just a way of speaking that there's like there's a lyrical quality to it that when you read it, it scratches some itch in my brain. So I felt that and I very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's look, I'm nothing if not the sum total of my influences, and so, when you're growing up and you're reading books like, written by Stephen King and Clive Barker especially, I mean, there's such a poetry to his prose and the way that he writes. And so much of my brain was taken up by prose writing when I was growing up. But the other half of my brain, like I grew up as a film fan in the 90s in the height of like the Miramax indie boom. And what was amazing was like, I grew up at a time when like I got to watch Quentin Tarantino's early movies, when Soderbergh's early movies, like Shane Black is another favorite writer of mine,
Oh yeah.
Kiss Bang Bang, I think, is one of the all-time greatest noir private eye movies ever made. Like, I love Hitchcock movies, right? The dialogue in those movies is it just cracks with energy. And so it's really important to me to sort of marry those things so that you have banter, but you also have poetry and you've got something to say. And you're right. I mean, for me, it's like uh, some writers will tell you that their job is to disappear, right? Is to just, I'm supposed to write so naturally and I'm supposed to sort of convey the human condition in a way that, like, you don't even feel the hand of the writer. And for me, it's exactly the opposite. It's like, I don't go to a Transformers movie to watch cars behave the way they behave in real life. Like, if
Sure.
I wanna go and I wanna see somebody use the medium, and so as a writer, I wanna be able to write, and I wanna be able to choose those words, and I want my characters to talk the way I wish I talked in real life. I wish I could consider my word choices that carefully, and so I tried to build a character who felt very much like a glib, grizzled noir PI and talked like that, but had the sort of banter and snap and in his dialogue with some of these characters that he meets along the way that you see and those kind of movies that I love growing up.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense, and I feel the same way. I mean, like, I see a clip or, like, one of the on social media of, the 10 best lines that Raylan Givens ever said,
Yeah,
and it's like, they're that's why we watch those things and
yeah,
repeat them, We don't say that in real life, You would I'm not ever in a
right.
situation where I would point a gun at anybody, but, like, there's one of my favorites, he throws a bullet at somebody and he says, "Next one's coming at you faster." I mean,
Yeah,
like,
like, don't you wish you were
that
that
doesn't
cool in
happen in
real life? Like,
real life.
yeah, and so to me, it's like that's how I like to write, and the great thing about comic books is you get to be your own writer, your own director. You really are dictating what's on that page, and so you get to make a little film every time you do one of these issues, and it's the most freedom. Like I don't have this level of freedom in television. Certainly, everybody reports to somebody, and with a comic book, and certainly Dark Horse has been wildly supportive of this book. I mean, I would turn in the scripts, there'd be no notes, and they were very happy, and, the art was amazing, the color's been amazing, like, everything's really come together really well, um, for these books, and they've been really, really fun, and, I've got the first 3, the 4th is being worked on, and I couldn't be happier with how they're turning out.
Yeah, I thought the first issue was great, like I said, and you kinda I really like the build, the tension of it. It's kind of like, you know, we get like a little bit of a cold open, which is kinda nice, which I'm sure is gonna come back at some point, but we get like a nice little
Yep.
historical cold open, and then we kinda get into the story and really meet, Avery, and that it's a bit of a build to figure out what is going on. I will say the panel and page that kind of reveals the thing is spectacular. I
Oh, cool.
mean, it's kinda hard to do almost like a jump scare in a
Right,
comic. It's
right.
this is pretty close, you know? It just was like all of the creative team coming together to really sell that moment. No, it wouldn't have worked if there wasn't the build up before, and it wouldn't have worked if
Yeah.
Miguel's art wasn't just so. The colors are wonderful. Yeah, it's just a this fantastic moment that really worked in the comic
I
form.
mean, that's hats off to the team. I mean, you write it's so funny. It's like you write these panels and I'm marginally specific about how I want the panels to be laid out, so I'm a little prescriptive in terms of what lands where, but you write a word like that, like, okay, this happens on this panel, and you don't really understand the impact of it until you get it back. You get the pencils and the inks and eventually the colors, and you're just like, man, they make it sing in a way that, it is beyond what you even could have imagined in the moment when you were writing it. And like you said, I mean, comics do tend to go dialogue light, and I wanted this to really be a character piece, and really, showcase its characters and really develop their relationship and their voices with each other. And um, look, you get paid the same amount for a page with a bunch of words on it or a page with very few words on it. And I'm like, look, I got all this real estate, I'm using it.
Yeah.
And I want these folks to be saying something. And his relationship with Irene continues through the first 4 books. And there's a pretty interesting revelation in the 4th book about how they met, and why he continues to be there for her. And there's some great little twists and turns throughout the course of the story. But that relationship really is the core relationship that runs through the spine of the first 4 issues.
Nice. Yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed it. You were talking about traveling, cross country, and I've, in my younger days, I did that a few times.
Yeah.
Drove around the country and had a wonderful time. I mean, I did once, like 30 days, 38 states. But me and a buddy, he had just graduated college. And I was just about to start law school. Um, and I loved it. It was like the second of 3 times that I drove cross country, and
Yeah.
I recommend it to anybody to really kind of travel the country, like, and really, try and see it and enjoy it and experience it. And, you know, uh, but I still didn't think. I mean, it's place is huge. Like, you're driving when you drive cross country, like, it is huge. And I still don't think I kinda grasped it because I'm, like, used to just, just how America is growing up here.
Right.
But when I was a year or so ago, my brother and I traveled to Dublin, and we're talking to some of the Irish, comic creators that had been at Dublin Comic Con after the convention, and one of them had, like, a girlfriend in America, and he was just he had been there a few times, but could still not get over, like, how big the country is coming from Ireland.
Yeah.
And I'm, like, seeing it through, like, somebody else's perspective who, like, didn't grow up here. Like, I grew up here, I understand it, yes, even traveling around it, I know it's big, but somebody from, like, Ireland, who you
Yeah.
can make it from one end to the other, like, pretty it doesn't you can do it in a day or so. He's like, I don't understand how big it is."
thing
I
that
was I was
consistently
seeing America with new eyes.
the thing that consistently floors me about that is, because it's so big and because parts of it are so seemingly empty, it is amazing the sheer volume of cool shit that it hides. Because
Oh, yeah.
you would never think to look here for that, and like I remember thinking, like, the best Indian food I've ever had in my life, I had at, like, a truck stop in, I wanna say it was somewhere in, like, Oklahoma or Arkansas or something. And I was just fascinated by this. You're at this, like, there's, like, a Love's and a Texaco and, like, all of the and a McDonald's over here, and then attached to it all is this little mom and pop Indian fair. And you're like, I wasn't even aware there was an Indian community in this state, let alone in this town. And then you start to learn the history of it, and why did this little population settle here? Why did
Yeah.
this person open this restaurant here in the seemingly least likely of places? And this country is filled with stories like that, of a lot of the states what we consider the flyover, or a lot of the states that you might drive through on a road trip, especially through the South and Midwest, at first glance are exactly what you expect them to be. Like, if you stop at a gas station in Texas and Tennessee and Arkansas and Oklahoma, like, you're probably gonna see something that you would expect as Texan, or as quintessentially Tennessee. But if
Right.
you look, you're gonna find all these amazing communities and niches and stories that you would never expect to find in these places. And those are the communities and the stories that I really want Texarcanum, as a series that hopefully will continue to grow and live on, to
Yeah.
like really explore and get in there and find all those sort of unlikely communities and what stories did they bring with them to these seemingly unlikely parts of the country, and how can we take those different stories like, toys in a toy box and smash them together in really interesting and unexpected ways. And that's one of the things that as the books go on, issues 2 and 3, it's kind of about how those stories influence and affect each other, so how can a little bit of Irish folklore weirdly intersect with a little bit of East Indian folklore? How can Native American and indigenous folklore intersect with Asian folklore, and how can these things play off of each other in interesting combination?
Yeah, the potential for all of those things to kind of come together and to continue to build. I mean, there's like a ton of it in a
Yeah.
series like this, so that's really awesome.
Yeah, and I think my hope is that, these 4 issues of Texarcanum go over well, that people enjoy them, and that there's, room to tell more stories, because I really love the idea of this particular series being a platform, not just for me to get in there and create a character I love and to tell stories and have fun. It's, you know, it's a I don't wanna command, like, ownership over this, I think this country is so rich with storytelling potential that in success, I would love for this book to grow and become a platform for other writers and other stories to come and take their turn with Avery Bell, and bring the stories from their cultures and their backgrounds with them, and tell stories that I wouldn't think to tell or maybe aren't my place to tell. Because, like, I'm very aware, I'm a white guy from Massachusetts, right? Like, my sort of view of horror is very Western European, and that's what we've traditionally gotten. But there are so many other voices out there, diverse voices in terms of whether it's comic books or television, who have their own stories to tell from their own culture. Like, what were their bedtime stories growing up? What were their gods, their monsters, their angels, their demons? And so, my hope is that in success, this becomes not just 4 great issues of something, but a platform for other storytellers to kind of come in and tell stories that are more personal to them and to with this character as a kind of common thread running between them. So, I think you're gonna get a vastly more interesting, and diverse array of creatures and combinations that you wouldn't expect, um, the more writers that you involve in this moving forward. So, I see it hopefully not just as, a single sort of 4-issue book, but as a platform for storytellers to come and spotlight their identities and their stories as well.
That's awesome. I
Yeah.
mean, that idea and taking something that you've, you know, created with this team and being able to say, I want other folks to, do something with it.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Far in the future and deep in space, humankind has been lost to the star. Quiet rumors circulate of righteous heroes willing to fight and save the enslaved and oppressed masses. Stories of beautiful, habit-clad saviors are giving hope to those crushed under the thumbs of tyrannical rulers and alien parasites. These are the stories of the Order of the Nunya.
Interesting. Interesting.
Now, if I can avoid all the Nunya knock-knock jokes in my head for a moment, this is a great new Kickstarter project from a few Yeti friends you should check out. With a story inspired by a 1937 Vatican photo, these weapon-wielding heroines strike me somewhere between warrior nun and 80s sci-fi adventures like Flash Gordon. Who doesn't like a nun running around with a collapsible battle axe? Halberd? Hey, it's Future Check, so I don't ask questions, and she's trashing robots in stylistic fashion, riding around like Marty McFly on a... Well, I can't tell you more, but if it piqued your interest to hear about it, head on over to the Order of the Nunya on Kickstarter so you don't miss it. I'll put a link in the show notes for you to make it easy.
Y'all, Jimmy, the Chaos Goblin strikes again. I should have known better than to mention I was working on my
DC Universe meets Ravenloft hybrid D&D campaign on social media. My bad. He goes and tags a bunch of comics creators we know, and now I have to get it in gear and whip this campaign into shape so we can start playing. Another friend chimes in, are you going to make maps? It's fair to say it's been a while since I put something together, so I guess? Question mark? It was then that I discovered Arkenforge. If you don't know who Arkenforge is, they have everything you need to make your TTRPG more fun and immersive, allowing you to build, play, and export animated maps, including in-person Fog of War capability that lets your players interact with maps as the adventure unfolds while you, the DM, get the full picture. Now I'm set to easily build high-res animated maps, saving myself precious time and significantly adding nuance to our campaign. That's a win every day in my book. Check them out at arkenforge.com and use the discount code YETI5 to get $5 off. I'll drop a link in the show notes for you, and big thanks to Arkenforge for partnering with our show. I think I'm going to make Jimmy play a Goblin Warlock just to get even. Welcome back.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit if we could,
Yeah.
though, because I was just curious in terms of your TV writing,
Yeah, please.
which is so fascinating to me, like just in general, because I as a kid, I love same. I loved comics, I loved movies, I loved television. I still remember. I don't remember a lot. My memory is definitely not what it used to be, but I still remember the first time somebody like told me, "Oh, you got to check out this movie Clerks," or I still remember the room I was in school when this guy David Kelly came in and he's like, everyone stop what you're doing. I need to tell you about Pulp Fiction. Like I still like I was like, what? I mean, I don't know, 15, and I
Yeah.
still, remember. Because I think David actually went on to work uh in film.
Yeah.
Um, but not that David Kelly.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
the famous
Yeah.
David
Yeah.
Kelly, a different David Kelly. But uh not the David Kelly you're thinking of, but
Yeah.
the David Kelly from Delaware. No, I'm just kind of curious, because one, you have the aspect of you are, growing up you said like a fan of Star Trek, and then getting to, write and produce
Yeah.
in the second and third season. Um, but also there. So I'm sure I would think that there's a part of it that it's like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. But then there's probably also the added pressure of like, all right, well, now you know, I gotta do the thing.
Yeah.
In terms of that room, was it a collaborative effort in terms of the writing, or would you be like assigned episodes?
No, I mean, the whole process is always very collaborative. And, a bunch of us who had worked on 12 Monkeys together had sort of reunited on that project. And that specifically was really interesting because we were brought in the second season, which was still being run at the time by Akiva Goldsman and Michael Chabon. And we were kind of coming in right as that season was gearing up and right as COVID was hitting. And so it was sort of like this perfect storm of of just sort of like, oh, this is the least effective way to try to get a season of television made, right? Like a lot of a lot of the
Yeah.
writers, we kind of, some of us knew each other, others didn't. That we weren't sure how we were going to produce television at all, at what scope we should or shouldn't be writing for. And then the 12 Monkeys kind of sect, those of us who came over from 12 Monkeys, Terry Metalis, myself, Travis Fickett, a couple other writers, um, we kind of ended up getting the keys to the car with season 3. And because Kiva had moved on to Strange New Worlds, COVID was kind of hadn't gone but was going. We had better sense of what we could produce. And CBS and Paramount were very lovely to say, look, tell the story you guys want to tell, right? Like no restrictions. And so, we with season 3, we really got to tell Star Trek the way we wanted to tell it and really continue Next Generation and kind of end that saga in a way that we felt was really fitting for Jean-Luc Picard and for those characters. And that was like a real sort of pinch me experience, when you get to dive back into your childhood and say, look, these characters, I grew up on these characters. These characters are somewhat why I'm a writer in the first place. Um, it's such an honor and it's such a privilege. It's also such a daunting responsibility to get that right. Especially when you're standing on a perfect recreation of the Enterprise D bridge.
Yeah,
Um,
wow.
and you're like, man, the responsibility we have to nail this, it's substantial, but so rewarding. And the audience really embraced it and embraced what we did. And yeah, it was a thrill.
Yeah, I loved season 3. I mean, I loved all of it. But I really felt season 3, and what I liked about it in particular is that there was such a love for the next generation cast, and it definitely could come across as, I don't wanna say gimmicky, but, "Oh, look, they're getting the
Yeah,
band back together,"
here.
and that, kind of trading on that nostalgia and that being all it is.
Yeah,
And, which I think sometimes we see that with, you know, franchises where they can just, let's repeat the hits, or let's
right.
get the cast back together. That'll be fun for the fans, and that'll be a nice moment. And maybe it is, but I feel like I always feel a little let down when that happens,
Yeah.
that there's kind of like a bit of like wasted potential. And I just thought season 3 was so good. I mean, I felt it had all of those moments, all of it were wonderful, but I really thought it was like very smartly weaved in with like the story that was being told. And
Yeah.
I just thought it was such a phenomenal series of television. In particular, you know, in terms of like, I don't, like I said, I had asked, I don't know if like episodes are assigned or everyone kind of
Yeah.
writes together. I don't know who, if there was one person or if it was the whole team responsible for writing Riker, like Jonathan Frakes' dialogue. But man, he was incredible. The writing was so good, and talk about a guy that felt like he just never stopped and got right back into that character, and showing all of the nuance and all of the emotion and the reality of, like, the story we were being told in the intervening years but didn't see. That was, like, the perfect combination of performer and writers coming together for his character arc in that 3rd season. I
Frakes
just
is
that was out of the park.
Jo Jonathan Frakes is one of my all-time favorite people I've ever worked with. He is everything you hope he would be. I mean, he is just a phenomenal person. He's incredibly talented. He is an exceptional actor, and, I think that, the risk you run, or the sort of risk reward of embodying a character like Riker for so long, is you are so attached to that one character that's how audiences remember you. They remember you as Riker, and he is so multifaceted and so talented as an actor that he could do anything. And so, we felt this responsibility when we were telling the story of, we don't wanna just bring back the same Riker. We wanna bring back someone who's had 30 years happen to him, that's had and time has passed and affected his life, and his life has changed. So it's like you wanna bring back the character that everybody loves and respects, but you wanna bring them back with something new to say and new to play.
Right.
And he rose to that occasion and he crushed it. And then it's just, annoyingly nice. Like, I mean, he's just the nicest guy, and you spend time with him, and he just fills a room, and you're like, "Man, I wish I could be more like him." He's a wonderful mensch.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
that's good to hear about somebody, whose work you admire. But I mean, I just felt the writing and the performance just really came together
That was
in
the ethos of
particular.
the whole series was really, it's not worth doing if you don't have something new to say. If you're just bringing back the toys, if you're just dragging them out of the toy box, and
Right.
you're just going to tell the same old stories. And we had a chance because so much time had passed, and not only the actors but the characters had lived so much life in between, that we could bring them back as versions of themselves. But they've all changed the way that, when you have like a high school reunion 25 years later, you're like, "Oh, you're still the same person, but you're also fundamentally different because you've lived 25 years of life or whatever. And
Yeah,
so
sure.
there was something new to say, there was something new to explore, and we were really, really fortunate that we were given the opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. And then now I guess from 12 Monkeys going to Picard, and then is Terry Metalis also doing the Magic the Gathering?
Yes. So,
Okay.
we've got our little troop, and, we've been very fortunate, 12 Monkeys to Picard, Magic the Gathering. We did 2 seasons of that for Netflix. And so, that's been an amazing privilege to try to figure out the ransom note of that mythology, when you're looking at, however many thousands of cards that they've generated and trying to sort of look at them all and go, what's a story to tell? That challenge is such a privilege to be able to tackle. And
Yeah.
that's in the middle of production now and is looking amazing. We have an amazing cast. I can't say who, but you know, we're 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 creating something I think that's going to be really, really special. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to live up there in the pantheon of like very, sort of high end, young adults animation. And so that's going to be, I think, super, super fun. Whenever it comes out. Animation is such an
Awesome.
incredibly long process, and then yeah, and a lot of those writers also have moved on now to the Vision series that we're doing for Marvel. I'm here in London right now, actually producing that, and again, that's just been an extraordinary like honor and a privilege to be able to do.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I I love board games. I played D&D. I have a friend
Yeah.
Dan who does stuff for Comic Book Yeti, which I talk about Dan all the time. He's like he is the guy in my friend group that owns more board games than like anybody I know. But Magic the Gathering, I kind of like missed. Were you familiar? Had you played it, or did you have to kind of like learn it in order to write this? Write on the series.
It's interesting because I think I had played one game of it at one point, but I'm surrounded by nerds. Like all my entire friend group is like tabletop D&D nerds. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I was exceedingly familiar with it. I knew all the characters. I knew the kind of the stories. I knew the key planes, that a lot of my friends gravitated towards. I would sit in and watch people play, but I think I'd only played like a handful of games when I came to the show. And then of course once you get into it, like, you just have to get so deep into the lore. Our table in the writers' room had, like, all of the lore books, these beautiful, gorgeous art books that have been produced
Oh, wow.
on all the regions and characters, and it's an endless amount of it's an embarrassment of riches. And so the job really isn't, it's not being additive, it's editing, right? It's like, which of these pieces can we kind of come up with and tell one story that sort of weaves through all of the greatest hits of places and characters
Yeah.
that Magic fans are going to want to see.
Right. It's
Um,
almost like there's too much source material in order to,
oh my god,
at
you could
least
do
at least to focus on like, okay, one season.
yeah,
We can't possibly do
look,
everything.
you could do a whole show set in one of the planes that we visit in one episode. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah. Wow.
it's trying to strike that balance between you don't wanna just seem like you are, checking off boxes for fans. So it's like, "Okay, yeah, we did that. Okay, yeah, we did that. Okay, yeah, we did that." You wanna tell a meaningful story that takes our characters to these places for great dramatic reasons, really emotional reasons, but also uses those places in all the fun ways that, as a fan of Magic, you would wanna see. So, hopefully we've created something that Magic fans will feel really connected to, and then they'll feel like we've honored the thing that they really love, and hopefully we've used all the locations and characters that, if you're a Magic fan, you would hope to see in a Magic show, and hopefully we've used them in inventive and cool ways that you might not have expected. So
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
that sounds great too, but, I am very excited for other for listeners to check out TexArcanum. But Chris, thank you, so much. I know it's late where you are, so I really,
way to do it.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. But listeners, TexArcanum's coming out through Dark Horse. It's going to be out July 23rd. So you know when this episode comes out, you'll have plenty of time to let your local comic book shop know that you want to add it to your pull list, so you can get it, you can read it, and come and find me on social media or TikTok or I don't know wherever I am, and let me know. Let's talk about it because I really I want to chat about it. I really love the first issue. I can't wait to see where it goes from here. Yeah, oh, Chris, because I'm assuming that you were a Next Generation fan, and whenever I have somebody who I find
Yeah.
out is a fan of Next Generation, I always ask, "What's your favorite episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation?"
Oh, you
We'll put you on the spot.
that's an impossible question. That's an impossible question.
Okay.
Uh,
You
I you know, no, I can't answer that. Like, I honestly
okay.
I think it's
All right.
the far point, right? Because it's just
Starts
you
off the series. It's a
starts off the series,
two-parter, you
it's a
know?
it because I remember it might not be the best episode of the series, but I remember it's the one that makes the most impression because when I watch it, I go back to that time of me then watching it and thinking, "Oh, this is something that's gonna be this is something cool. This is something I'm gonna watch, I'm gonna plug into. This is destination viewing every week." Because I
Oh,
grew up
yeah.
watching OG Star Trek with my dad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
my
me too.
my father was, fairly blue collar dude. He knew he was raising a nerd, but he was not a nerd himself, and, like, the only sci-fi he spoke was Star Trek, and so, he would carve out time to spend with me by watching the original series, and so when TNG premiered, and I just remember watching Farpoint and just thinking like, "Oh, this is that, but for me," and I remember that making such an impact, that it's very I mean, it's not the best episode of the show over all those seasons, but it is
Mhm.
the one that I have the fondest memories of.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
That's an acceptable answer, Chris,
Yeah.
and that's a good answer.
Yeah.
I'm just always curious. It's been a few times on this podcast, Star Trek: The Next Generation has come up, and I always like where they're whenever it does, I'm always like, I'm just curious. I just wanna
Yeah.
know. Listeners have heard it before. My favorite is The Inner Light. I think that was Star Trek at its best for me, but, you know.
It's funny, like, Inner Light it's such a it's kind of so go-to because I mean, it's obviously so up there in terms of the best that,
Yeah.
it just seems expected to say that, but
Yeah.
so I always default to what's the one I have the strongest sort of, like, emotional sense memory of, and watching that show premiere after having had the experience of watching the OG show with my dad, I think, Farpoint
Yeah.
really was like, "Okay, this is gonna be my version of that."
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it is kind of like an answer that a lot of folks give, but yeah, there's just something about The Inner Light that has really stuck with me.
Yeah.
The other episode I would say that has always stuck with me is the one where what is it? Barkley
Mhm.
when he sees the monsters in the transporter. I love that episode.
I'm a fan of transporter episodes. I
Yeah.
anytime something the transporter can be used as a gimmick for something, I'm in. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's the
Nice.
Star Trek is such a font of endless storytelling that, we could do it forever, and hopefully,
Yeah.
who knows, maybe one day we'll have the opportunity to go back to that franchise and play around in that sandbox again, but, being able to do season 3 of Picard was really a dream.
Yeah. It was an incredible season of television. But
Yeah,
again, I started talking about Star Trek. I
no,
apologize.
all good.
TexArcanum, July 23rd from Dark Horse. This is my guest tonight has been Chris Monfette. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the
No,
podcast. I
thank you, I
really appreciate
appreciate
it.
everything. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, listeners, for listening. Let me know what it is you're reading. And shout out to my brother Bobby, the Cryptid Creator Corner's #1 most dedicated fan. Listeners know Bobby listens to all my episodes. Thanks again, Chris. And I'll see you next time, everybody.
This is Byron O'Neill, one of your hosts of the Cryptid Creator Corner, brought to you by Comic Book Yeti. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It lets us know how we're doing, and more importantly, how we can improve. Thanks for listening.